Hello, I'm Andrea Lipinski.
And I'm Keith DeCandida. We've made it to the 50th episode of the Chronic Rift. That's right, this is the Big 5-0.
It's our golden anniversary.
Amazing, isn't it?
Tonight, on our roundtable discussion, we will be discussing European comics.
But first, we have a Russian science fiction author in our studio today. His name is Vevgeny Voyshunsky. He's on a little trip to the States, and he was kind enough to stop by the studio. He's being interviewed by Marina Frants, whom Rift viewers will remember from our Quantum Leap, Science Fact and Science Fiction, and our recent Jules Verne and H.G. Wells discussion. Take it away, Marina.
Hello, Evgeny. Thank you for coming on our show. And let us start by asking, how is the science fiction that's being written in the new country, whatever its name is going to be, different from the science fiction that was written in the old Soviet Union?
Well, at first, excuse me, please, my bad English. And about your question. Usually, the literature changes following slowly after the society changes. I think it should be an interval between the historical events in our country and the trying of the reflecting it in the literature. It is valid also to the science fiction. The science fiction of today changes, of course. These changes is, for example, the big layer of the former Soviet science fiction, which was concentrated on the describing of the communist future of the Earth, disappeared.
Mm-hmm. Disappeared along with the communism, right?
Yes. Then disappeared also the necessary in the Aesop language and in the euphemisms. And now, instead of this, there appears the new attempts or tryings to describe the return of the man, of the people, return of the people who were raised under the great pressure of ideology to the normal human values. So it is.
Yeah, so as the country is adjusting, the literature is also adjusting.
Yes, another country, another literature.
Right. What Western science fiction writers are popular in Russia, and how much of them are being translated?
Well, many of the Western science fiction writers are well known at us in Russia. The greatest popularity is enjoyed by Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, now late, Robert Sheckley, Clifford Simak. Today, the street book market in Moscow, there are very much book markets in Moscow now. They are mostly, they are deluded with the books of Harry Harrison and the Martian Cycle of Edgar Burroughs, The books of Zelazny, of Ursula Le Guin.
Are they popular?
Yes, they are very popular, and it is also very popular the horrors and horror genre and adventure stories of Stephen King.
Are Russian writers very influenced by the Western writers that they read?
I don't think that my colleagues, Russian SF writers, are influenced with the Western science fiction. The problems of West and our problems are very different. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yes. And but I can think that the influence of all the good Jules Verne is
Yeah, Jules Verne, yes.
yes, and Herbert Wells, for example. And I think the lyrical prose of Ray Bradbury and the famous robotic rules of Isaac Asimov, they make their effect.
How do politics influence the Russian writers, especially back in the old Soviet Union, like when you were writing?
No, I think not influence, not.
Not even as far as state censorship that was taking place?
I think not. I think not.
No. Have you ever personally had any experience with censorship under the old system?
Yes, of course I did. It was, I cannot say normal, but it was total. For example, with my co-author Lukadyanov book, The Very Far Off Tartes, that was published in the end of the 1960s,
yes.
Yes, was published with very much difficulties. There was, the censor was afraid of our tema. There were the slaves who died in the mines in an ancient despotic state, and it was very difficult to publish this.
Okay, so they took the slavery as a poke at the government?
Yes.
I see.
Yes, and I think these times are in past now. The fall of censorship.
Well, sorry about this, we're out of time, but thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
And now, Jim Frenkel is here with a special Golden Anniversary edition of Book Notes. Take it away, Frenkel.
Thank you. Excuse me. Being the Golden Anniversary show, it seems only appropriate that we should talk about the golden age of science fiction. When the first generation of great science fiction writers came to the fore in the 30s and 40s, the 1930s and 40s that is, there was one factor that unified all these people in their quest for the best science fiction. And that was they all wanted to write what is called hard science fiction. This doesn't mean that you can bounce it and it cracks on the floor. It means that it was based on scientific ideas. Science fiction has always been enamored of ideas, and none are any better than the idea of science that no one's ever thought of before. People like Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, and other of the great science fiction writers from the 30s and 40s were just enormously powerful because they had ideas that made people go, gosh, wow. They engendered that thing that we call the sense of wonder, the idea that there's more out there than we can know now, and in the future we're going to have scientific ideas that will just blow our minds. I mean, without drugs, just ideas, scientific ideas. Ever since the 30s and 40s, people have complained constantly that science fiction has gotten soft, that it's now human social sciences that have messed it all up, that women write science fiction. Perish the thought, some people think. But the fact of the matter is that there's more hard science fiction now being written than ever before, mostly because more people know more about science than they knew before, and some great science fiction is being written today. One of the best pieces of hard science fiction to be published this or any year, in my opinion, is a book called A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge. Vevgeny is known for writing books like The Peace War and Marooned in Real Time, and a wonderful short novel called True Names, which is credited with letting the cyberpunk revolution get its start in 1981, before anyone else had thought of writing about virtual reality or talking among computers in their own shared reality. The book, A Fire Upon the Deep, has two wonderful science fiction ideas. First of all, there's the idea that the galaxy is comprised of places where you can be smarter or stupider, and you're limited to a certain level of intelligence by where you are in the universe, not by, who you are or what you've done to augment yourself. If you're in the slow zone, you're slow. I mean, no automation, no artificial intelligence. And we go all the way from the slow zone up to the transcend, where there are beings of pure thought that we can't even understand. In this book, somebody has stolen something from the transcend and is trying to use it for their own purposes, and it gets way out of hand. They are completely destroyed by what they have unleashed. It's a Pandora's box of destruction, and they flee to the slow zone thinking that they can escape being chased by the thing that they have unleashed. They take with them something that might save the day, but they land on a planet that is medieval, and this is the other wonderful science fiction idea. The people, or the beings who live on this planet called Time's World, they kind of look like wolves or dogs, and if you have one of them or two of them together, they're really not very smart. But to put 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 of them together, and they're at least as smart as humans and sometimes smarter. This concept of a pack of animals that can think together by having sound transmitted and transmitting their brain waves by sound, sharing memories, losing memories when one member dies, gaining other memories when another member is joined with the old pack, is just mind-boggling. Against this is just a wonderful adventure that flies through over 400 pages of extraordinarily suspenseful and adventurous text. Vevgeny is known as a hard science fiction master, but he's never written a book this wonderfully well written. It's marvelous storytelling. You care about these people. There are two kids who are desperately marooned on this planet, and there's a rescue mission from the middle of the galaxy, what's called the Beyond, which is where most of us are, believe it or not, in one way or another. And this rescue mission is made up of humans and aliens, some of which look like potted plants. Now, it sounds silly when you describe this stuff, but you have to believe me that in execution, this is fabulous science fiction, and I'm going to go way out on a limb and say this is one of the 10 or 15 best science fiction books I've ever read. This is Jim Frenkel reporting on science fiction from New York.
I told one person that we were doing a discussion on European comic books, and she said, they're European comic books? Told someone else, and he said, isn't that an oxymoron? The second one was kidding. The first one, sadly, was not. However, comic art, in many ways, derives its origins from Europe. There were comic strip-like things being published in 19th century European magazines, such as Punch, Charivari, and Fliegen Blätter. There are a great number of European comics being published, and they have influenced certain American publishers. And we're going to talk about these wonderful things, and however unpopular and rare, tonight on The Chronic Rift. With me and Andrea to do so, way on the far right, is Terry Nantier, co-founder and publisher of NBM, one of the 4 largest disseminators of this stuff to this country. Next to him is Calvin Reid. European comics aren't very popular, but they've received critical raves. Calvin is one of those raving critics. He reviews trade comics for Publsihers Weekly. He's also been on when we talked about alternative comic books in the past. And next to me is Bernd Metz, one of the other publishers of European comics. He is the publisher of Catalan Communications, who imports this stuff pretty much exclusively. First question is, well, either Bernd can go first and then Terry or whatever. Why did you start publishing European comics? What led you to start bringing this stuff into this country?
Well, the main reason was that I came from a publishing background and had European connections and was aware of a great number of artists and possibilities in publications that have never been seen here before or appeared in heavy metal to some degree, so that I knew a little bit about them. And I thought perhaps there was a market, since this big country, there's always room for something new. There was a market for some of the best material that was available from Europe. And so together with a partner in Spain, I started Catalan Communications and started publishing these European artists in translation and trying to get them into the market here.
How about you?
Okay, well, for me, basically, I grew up, you might say, at least my teenage years in France, and that's where I first became a comics fan. Was reading Spirou and Tintin and a lot of the others, and became very much an expert on European comics, as fans will, knowing all the history and all the names and everything, of course, and was thinking, I am American, I happen to be living in Paris, but I was thinking, why don't we have this in America? And so I had the thought, well, when I come back to the U.S., here's the thing I want to do. I'd like to publish comics and bring the American comic field back up to its former glory, which back in the 70s it had completely lost. Let's not forget. And I figured that the graphic novel was a very important form to, in fact, rejuvenate the field here. As far as NBM is concerned, the strategy from the beginning has never been to just do European comics. It's to start with that, a little like what heavy metal has done, provide an example, and then take it from there.
Do you think, what's the main difference, as a reader, do you think, what's the main difference between European and American comics, if there is one, and if there is a generic way that European comics are?
Well, I think obviously there's a departure from the superhero, which dominates the mainstream comics here. But there's a very heavy emphasis on personal graphic style as well as a personal literary style. In fact, to some extent, of course, it's unusual in American comics to use a literary term towards them, but clearly European comics really produce works on a par with serious literary fiction that, what we would call serious literary fiction here, but are serious graphic literary works. I would think that would be the main difference.
Terry, you mentioned before that you spent a lot of time growing up in France. From many of the European comics that I've been reading, about 90% of them seem to be from France. And I always check at the beginning to say translated from the French. Oh, another one. And so many of them seem to be from France. Is this because the other countries in Europe are not putting out as many comics, or that publishers like yourselves don't think that the other comics would carry over to American audiences as well?
No, that's the fact that the French language, one should say, it's not just France, it's also Belgium that has just an inordinate share of production. Do have, you could almost say, an hegemony in the market, and with the quality and talent and all in Europe, and they sell a lot of their books and authors to many other European countries. There is production, there's a lot of comics done in Italy and Spain, but it doesn't come anywhere near to the amount and the quality that one can see in the French language. So I think that's the principal reason.
It's true also that there's a lot of Italian material, especially from the 80s, that's been translated from a French edition, because there are more people who translate from the French rather than the Italian. So I've always used the French edition of an Italian original, for example, to do my translation. That's why it says translated from the French sometimes. But the golden age of comics in Europe is definitely from France, also from Spain, although it's less well known, mainly because not a lot of it has been translated, and from Italy, where now there's not much new being done, but certainly they produced, I think, the most radical departures from even the French classic type of comics during the 80s. And now you have Germany as a new country that's developing comics, but again, what they're publishing first is the French and the Italian and the Spanish work that's become before them but hadn't gotten into Germany yet. So you see this developing in Germany, in Scandinavia, which has always been big on comics, and also in Britain, although Britain is sort of in the same position, although further back than we are here now, whereas they're doing very well with things like Star Trek books and things like that. European comics as such haven't really crossed over into Britain.
Britons are like more like American comics than they are, and which is probably why so many so many British writers have gone over to.
And you see a lot of American comics like Richard Corbin, etc., being done in Europe now, so that you get the best from each country do cross over, and there's this cross-cultural influence, and I suppose that American comics do fairly well over there, but not as well as they do here.
It's not major,
It's not major, although Richard Corbin, for example.
There was some excitement about American comics in France for a while, but it seems to have kind of died down.
Well, yeah, but someone like Richard Corbin, who isn't
well, he's been
big since the 80s, yeah.
Right. What about someone like the Hernandez brothers? I mean,
they are being published in Spain in El Vibra magazine, and as graphic novel books in Spain. They're also in France, I think. They're being done there now.
They're known, but it's...
My next question, obviously, is how the reception here.
Well, the reception here from day one continues to grow. So that the market has not been saturated, and as we go along, I think Terry finds too that there are more and more people who discover these kinds of books, the graphic novels of a hefty 100 pages or so at $15.95 or $20.95, whatever, for the first time. And so it opens a new door for that particular individual who may have come from comics, or he or she may have come from another interest. But basically, I find that there are people who've come across this for the very first time every day. So my feeling is the market hasn't been saturated, but it grows very slowly.
Well, I think I'll take a dissenting view, unfortunately, on that. Not be so optimistic. We've tried for many years, and there's a number of things that have been some disappointment to us, frankly. I think it's a matter of really properly developing a real graphic novel audience in general that we have not got yet in the U.S., like, say, France has. And once that is done, European comics may, in fact, take a better share. But right now, things are a little bit limited, and European comics have kind of been small, unfortunately.
But there's a reason for that. And I think it's
yes.
and that is because in Europe, comics are part of the culture from the time people are knee-high to the time that they're in their 60s and 70s. Everybody reads comics, from the French president.
But that didn't start that way.
No,
in
but
fact, the French
that's where
very condescending to comics just barely 20 years ago.
But that's
and it's Asterix that turned that around. That's what we need is an
Well, maybe Asterix turned that around, but the point is that's where things are now. The same way we have music and film popularized in this country and have a wide variety for every interest, and magazines for every interest, so too in Europe, comics has that position. But it doesn't have it over here, where we don't have comics that are written about in magazines, with few exceptions. And it's a minor part of the culture, and from its history has always been seen as something as on the lower end of the cultural spectrum. And it's only recently that people are saying, well, Mouse has got a Pulitzer Prize, maybe there's something to comics, or this comic got reviewed in Publsihers Weekly, maybe we should take a look at it. But it happens slowly.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that makes a difference is in France, the comics are published by quote-unquote real book publishers. Not
only that, there are so many more of them and many different styles, whereas here 70% of the market, one comic is indistinguishable from another because it's a superhero comic, and I've never been able to see any differences among them, with some exceptions. But basically, there's not variety here. And in Europe, you have such a diversity of artists, of stories, of markets, so that they do Disney. They do everything right on along the line to things that are strictly for adults, but also things that, most kids wouldn't be interested, like the Billy Budd here that was written by an American author, Jerome Sharon, but he's a best-selling writer, but he doesn't get the kind of sales here that he gets in Europe, So it's hard to understand why the market is so resistant, and part of it is a lack of exposure. That's the only way I can explain it.
Well, also all the publishers, I mean, all of the four big disseminators of this are all fairly small publishers. I mean, you guys are not Random House or
exactly. We don't have the money to put behind it.
Could you talk a little bit about, just quickly, about the retailing and getting them out there? I mean,
I have, seen them in some stores now that, like Waterstones in Boston, which is a huge store, and I went in there to give them my graphic novel pitch, and lo and behold, in front of me was a whole section called graphic novels, and I almost dropped dead from excitement. You know,
also, they'll put it in the humor section or something.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
And you can go to Tower Books; they have graphic novels, and you see them here and there, but. My pitch has always been, look, until you put a section called graphic novels in the bookstore and not file them with something else, they're not going to be sought after by people who want graphic novels.
Okay, well, the golden anniversary has just come to an end. We have run out of time.
That was a really quick golden anniversary. That was very good.
Thank you all very much for exposing the masses to this unknown art form.
It wasn't completely unknown.
Well,
My God.
But it's less unknown than it was about 20 minutes ago.
Okay.
Right. Next week is Icon. In fact, the next 2 weeks are Icon. We're going to do our location coverage of Icon 11. We were there. We filmed things. We did panels. We had interviews with actresses and writers and a panel on censorship. You'll love it. We'll see you then.
Good night.
This episode was sponsored in part by The Omega Zone, a store specializing in comic books and video movie rentals, including science fiction, horror, animation, and cult films you won't find at your local video store. Located at 258 West 15th Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues in Manhattan. Telephone 212-645-6941. Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. Recent issues include interviews with Neil Gaiman, John Byrne, Peter David, and George Perez. For a free catalog, write to Comics Interview, 234 5th Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. Superlative Video is now accepting clients for remote video shooting in half-inch and 3/4-inch formats. This fall, we will have studio space available as well. For more information, please call 212-548-8495. Heavy Metal Tundra is launching a line of European hardcover comics this spring and summer, including Margot and Bad Town by Jerome Charon and Massimiliano Fezzato, the story of a young girl who leaves her small-town life for the adventure of the big city. Wind of the Gods, an epic 13th century samurai tale by Cathias and Adamov in the tradition of Akira Kurosawa's films. Desperados, a meatball spaghetti western by Cromwell and Jay Ruffner. Nekibo and Grisnor, two books that extend the adventures of Tintin to adulthood by Dieter and Plessis. And Fulu, the compelling tale of an African woman's capture and life as a slave in the U.S. South. All of these books are available this summer from Tundra, the creator's edge. Available in bookstores now is Batman, Tales of the Demon, Enemy Ace, and Catwoman, Her Sister's Keeper, the best in cutting-edge and popular graphic novels from Warner Books and DC Comics. All titles and characters are trademarks of DC Comics, all rights reserved. Fantagraphics Books, publisher of Snake Eyes, an anthology series featuring some of the best of the New York underground cartoonists, including Julie Doucette, R. Sikoriak, Kaz, Glenn Head, and many more. The second issue is on sale now at your local comic shop, or order by mail to Fantagraphics Books, 7563 Lake City Way, Seattle, Washington, 98115. Aria Press, publishers of A Distant Soil by Colleen Duran. The second issue of this tale of an unusual family is on sale now at your local comic shop. For subscription information, write to Aria Press, 12638-21 Jefferson Avenue, Suite 173, Newport News, Virginia, 23602.